A 20-year-old woman who loved equestrian sports rode her bicycle to the stables to check on her horse. She never made it. She was found barely alive in a wooded area, and she passed away shortly after. The police had no leads, and the case stretched on for years. Decades later, investigators reopened the case and found a tiny clue that ultimately helped uncover the truth. Jody Loomis was born in 1944 in the Seattle suburb of Mill Creek. From early childhood, she loved horses and soon began riding. She was also serious about drawing and even painted the walls of her room with pictures of horses. After finishing school, Jody planned to study nursing. She also began actively helping injured horses, caring for them at a local stable. Jody couldn't imagine her life without these animals and tried to spend as much time with them as possible. She lived with her parents and her younger sister. In 1972, when she was 20, she had a fiancé named Jim. They were planning to get married soon, and until then, they lived in her parents' house. On August 23rd of that year, Jody decided to ride to the stables to check on the horses. Usually her father drove her, but he was busy that day. She decided to get there by bike and left home in the afternoon. Even though Jody was an adult, her mom still worried about her and asked her not to be out after dark. She gave her some change to call home from a payphone if needed. Time passed, and Jody still wasn't back. Her parents started to worry seriously, and as night approached, their anxiety turned to panic. Jody should have been back long ago, or at least contacted them from a payphone. At some point, the family decided to call the police. They called 911, reported their daughter missing, and waited for officers to arrive to file a report. However, around 11 p.m., police knocked on their door to deliver shocking news. Jody had been found on the street, barely alive, but had passed away on the way to the hospital. Hearing this, her mother collapsed to the floor, and her father, in shock, couldn't say a word. Experts determined that Jody had suffered several serious injuries, as well as a severe wound to her head. The attacker had also violated her before leaving her among the trees near the road she was supposed to be riding on. Detectives confirmed that Jody never made it to her destination. After interviewing residents in the area, they pieced together an approximate timeline. Right after leaving home, Jody stopped by her friend and neighbor's house to ask her to go for a ride. But she was busy, so Jody continued on. At the end of the street, she passed a girl selling apples. After that, no one saw her until about 5:30 p.m., when she was discovered in a wooded area near the road. A man and a woman were driving by and noticed something strange near a fallen tree. They stopped and got closer, seeing Jody, barely alive. She had severe, visible injuries but was still breathing. Almost all of her clothing was missing. The driver first thought about driving to the nearest payphone to call for an ambulance, but he ultimately decided to drive her to the hospital himself, as it would be faster. Her injuries looked too severe, so every minute counted. Even though they managed to get Jody to the nearest hospital in 15 minutes, she passed away on the way. Immediately after, the police got involved. After speaking with the people who drove her to the hospital, they headed to the location where she was found, hoping to find any clues. Jody's bicycle was found about 50 yards away. Investigators also learned that she had taken a horse bridle from home, but it was never found. According to the people who found her, she was only wearing boots and her underwear. The rest of her clothes were found near the scene and sent to forensics, but this yielded no leads. Additionally, an empty shell casing was found at the crime scene, but this clue couldn't help find the person responsible. Detectives had absolutely no leads, so they began to explore all possibilities. First, they checked Jody's fiancé, but the young man had an undeniable alibi. In a grim coincidence, he worked at the very hospital where she was taken. His colleagues confirmed that he was on duty that day and had not left the building. After that, investigators decided to check the family that owned the piece of woodland where Jody was found, but here too they couldn't confirm any involvement. At this point, detectives had no leads left, and the case went cold for many years. Police tried to find witnesses who might have seen a suspicious man near the area on the day of the tragedy, but here too they hit a dead end. For the next 36 years, the investigation made no progress, until 2008, when it was handed over to the ColdCase unit. The first thing detectives discovered was that almost all the important evidence had disappeared from storage over the past decades. They couldn't find the projectile that ended Jody's life, her underwear, or the biological samples taken from the victim. It was suspected that other officers might have accidentally sent these items for analysis, confusing Jodie's case with a similar one. And when that case was solved, the evidence was destroyed. As a result, investigators were left with only a few items, her shoes and some other articles of clothing. They were sent to the lab, where experts made an unexpected discovery. On one of her boots, they saw a tiny spot. After examining it, they determined it was a drop of male biological material, which almost certainly belonged to the attacker. Despite this tiny clue sitting in storage for 36 years, experts managed to extract a DNA profile of the suspected perpetrator. Unfortunately, he wasn't in the FBI database. This meant that at least in recent decades, the man hadn't been convicted of any serious crimes. Investigators compared this sample with the DNA profiles of several suspects, including Jodie's fiancé. They also interviewed many men who lived in the area at the time of the incident and asked them to provide DNA samples. Unfortunately, all these efforts yielded no results. Police didn't get a single match. Detectives could only hope that the perpetrator would eventually come onto the police radar and his DNA would be entered into the database. But until then, they had nothing to work with. As a last resort, they decided to try one more thing. The police participated in creating a deck of playing cards, where each card featured information about different unsolved crimes in the county. Jodie's case was included, and the decks were distributed in local prisons. Investigators hoped that one of the inmates might have heard something about these cases from their cellmates. Perpetrators often brag about their actions, not worrying too much that other criminals will tell the police. However, inmates often trade this information for a reduced sentence or better conditions. Unfortunately, this move bore no fruit, and the case went cold again. It was only reopened in 2018, when advances in DNA analysis gave investigators new, unique opportunities. That year, an innovative technology called genetic genealogy began to be widely used. With its help, experts could find relatives of the DNA owner, giving police a unique way to find suspects. In July 2018, detectives sent the DNA sample from Jodie's attacker to Parabon, a private lab, and experts began searching for his relatives. The successful use of this technology is only possible if one of the DNA owner's relatives is already in a genetic database. This could be even a very distant relative, so investigators often have to do a huge amount of work to track down the person responsible. Eventually, the experts at Parabon found a third cousin of the attacker, and detectives, along with a genealogist, began their search. They studied this cousin's family tree, looking for relatives and eliminating unsuitable individuals based on gender, age, and other factors. They needed a man who lived near the area where the crime occurred. After exhaustive work, they finally identified the parents of the suspected individual. They lived just a half-hour drive from where Jodie was found. But there was one problem. The couple had 6 sons. As soon as detectives started digging into their backgrounds, they immediately zeroed in on a prime suspect. He lived just 5 miles from the crime scene and had been charged 5 times for violent offenses, including some against children. However, the court had always acquitted him, and the man never faced serious punishment. His name was Terrence Miller. In 1972, he was 30 years old. He had lived in the same place his whole life, and in 2018, he was still living there with his wife of 43 years. Before this, the man had been married 3 times, and each marriage ended in divorce. He first married at 18, when his bride was only 14. They had 2 daughters over a few years, after which the couple split. He had another daughter with his next wife, and during his 3rd marriage, Miller had 2 more daughters. In total, the man had 5 children from 3 different women. For most of his life, he worked as a heavy equipment operator, and in retirement, he and his 4th wife sold ceramics. It seemed this quiet pensioner was a poor fit for the role of a ruthless offender. However, detectives were almost certain of his guilt. To get his DNA sample, they had to tail the man for several days. Investigators tried to find an item he might have discarded, leaving his biological material on it, which they could then send to experts for comparison. On August 28th, they got their chance. Miller went to a casino and, before entering, threw a paper coffee cup into a trash can. Detectives retrieved it and sent it to the lab. Experts determined that the DNA from the cup was a perfect match for the biological material found on Jodie's boot. This, indisputably, confirmed the man's guilt, and investigators began preparing the case for court. This process took several months, during which Miller had no idea that the secrets of his past were about to be revealed to the world. On April 10, 2019, the 77-year-old man was finally arrested on a charge of murder. The court set his bail at $1 million. On June 14th, Miller was able to post that amount. It turned out he used the services of a special company that posts bail for a non-refundable fee. The suspect spent $100,000 to await trial in his home rather than in a jail cell. He was fitted with an ankle monitor and his movements were restricted, allowing him to leave his house only for trips to the store and the doctor. Jodie's relatives were outraged that the court allowed the accused to go home when he had already lived freely for 47 years after his actions. However, their complaints did not affect the court's decision. Initially, the first hearing was scheduled for that same year, but Miller's lawyers asked for a postponement. The following year, they again requested a delay, claiming they hadn't had enough time to prepare due to the pandemic. By the end of 2020, they tried to delay the trial again, but this time, their request was denied. Finally, the lawyers filed a motion to exclude the DNA sample from evidence, questioning the validity of the analysis, but the court denied this request. The trial finally began on October 26th. Miller pleaded not guilty and refused to testify, leaving all the work to his lawyers. The constant delays had a negative impact on the trial. The man who had discovered Jodie's body had died a few months before the trial began, though he managed to record his testimony on camera shortly before his passing. Miller's lawyers seized on this fact and tried to accuse him of the crime, arguing their position with several points. First, this man had initially given police several different reasons for why he and his companion were in that wooded area. Originally, he claimed they planned to practice shooting, so they decided to drive far away from residential areas. However, it later emerged that the man was having an affair with his companion, and at the time, he was hiding this fact from his wife. Secondly, he had a .22 caliber firearm, the same caliber as the shell that was found in the place where Jodie was found. At the time of the trial, his mistress was still alive but was suffering from cancer. Despite this, she was able to come to the hearing and told her version of events. The woman stated that they had wanted to be alone in the woods that day but stumbled upon Jodie. They tried to get her to the hospital but didn't make it in time. The woman denied the defense's accusation that she and her lover could have been involved in this terrible event. Next, the lawyers began to challenge the DNA results, questioning the professionalism of the experts who took the sample from Jodie's boot. They also pointed out that when the boot was examined in the 70s, forensic scientists hadn't noticed the spot. The prosecution believed all these arguments were baseless. The DNA analysis was conducted according to all standards, and the fact that Miller's biological material was on the deceased girl's boot was indisputable. The suspect himself told his lawyers that he didn't know Jodie and had never seen her in his life. Because of this, his lawyers couldn't even suggest that the contact between their client and the victim was consensual. Notably, the boots Jodie was wearing that day belonged to her younger sister. She had borrowed them without asking to ride to the stables, and this fact slightly confused the trial participants. There was speculation that Miller's DNA could have gotten on the boot before the incident, but this theory also seemed implausible. The man didn't know Jodie's sister, who was only 12 at the time. She confirmed in court that she had never seen him in her life, so this theory wasn't taken seriously. According to the prosecution's theory, Miller spotted Jodie on the deserted road and, threatening her with a firearm, forced her into the wooded area. There, he violated the young woman, ended her life, and fled shortly before the man and his mistress arrived at the scene. Although the defense lawyers managed to sow doubt among the jurors, Miller himself didn't believe he would win. The prosecution played a recording of his phone call with his wife from when he was still in custody. In it, he said that he was going to prison and there was no way to avoid it. He pointed out that his DNA was in the case and it was impossible to dispute such evidence. Throughout the conversation, he never once claimed his innocence, only repeating that he was going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The trial concluded on Friday, November 6th, and the jury was given a few days to deliberate. The judge gave them the weekend off, and they returned on Monday to discuss. While they were in the courthouse, Miller's wife called the police and reported that her husband had taken his own life. Under the terms of his bail, he was required to surrender all such items to the police, but the man had kept one back. Miller passed away at the scene, at the age of 78, but the jury didn't know this. 3 hours later, they reached a decision and were ready to announce it, but Miller's lawyers demanded they not do so. In their opinion, after the man's passing, there was no point in announcing the verdict. However, the judge thought otherwise. He stated that Jodie's family had the right to know the verdict, and the jury delivered their decision. They found Miller guilty of the crime. Unfortunately, the girl's parents did not live to see this moment. Her father passed away in 2005, and her mother in early 2019. Her younger sister thanked the court, the police, and the experts, who found the person responsible for what happened to Jody and saw the case through to the end, despite all the circumstances. She admitted that over the years her family had lost hope of ever learning the truth. If you liked this video, I also recommend subscribing to our Telegram channel, where we post the most interesting crime news from around the world every day. Thanks for watching and take care of yourself.